I've got everybody together because I've gotten, not just recently, but questions from a lot of new supervisors about what they need to know, and I asked several of you to submit some things that you needed more information on. So this particular workshop is to respond to things that you've asked about rather than things I think you should know. Because what I think you should know and what you think you should know are not necessarily the same thing. So we're going to be going over the PowerPoint that I put together based on a lot of the questions I've gotten from new supervisors. I'm taping this because I want to see how effective my teaching methods are, and the best way to do that is to have it taped so I can observe myself teaching. I do this periodically, maybe once or twice a year. Haven't done it in recent years, but so I thought it'd be a good time to update it. So don't feel intimidated by the fact that this is being taped. So any questions about what we're going to be doing? Okay, let's go ahead and start. One of the first questions was about the employee exiting the college, and all of you have a copy of Administrative Procedure 62203 that lays out the specific steps that are set out when an employee exits the college. As a supervisor, the most important thing you need to know about is notify human resources. It's important, if it's a permanent employee, please have them do a letter of resignation. Because we really can't take anybody off the payroll unless there's some signature that says so-and-so's last day or my last day will be. So it's really important if they're a permanent position to notify us with the employees submitting a letter of resignation to you and to us. If it's a temporary employee like a 1050 or part-time faculty, just send us an email about what their last day will be. And that's good enough for non-permanents. And what happens is once we get the letter, that will trigger Lisa Espedal on my staff to send Lance James a email, and he goes through, remember the old system where you had to go from person to person? Well, he then contacts the people that he needs to contact to find out what was issued to you, and he'll tell you what he wants you to bring to him in your as part of the exit procedure. So that's kind of, we made that change last year. It's one-stop shopping. The exiting employee doesn't have to go around to 6 or 7 different people. It's dealt in one particular place. And that's essentially the process. So your biggest responsibility as a supervisor is to make sure we know when the employee is leaving. And if it's a permanent employee, letter of resignation with their signature, a blank letter of resignation or a non-signed one doesn't do us any good. We need the signature. And then if it's a temporary employee, just an email from the supervisor saying so-and-so's last day is whatever. Because if you don't notify us, they're going to go getting a salary. It's going to create an overpayment. That's a problem. Alita.
What about in the rare cases that they just leave and don't come back, or they don't do the letter they say they're going to, or whatever?
Well, if it's a permanent employee, in other words, they have not notified you verbally they're leaving, well, if they just leave and send us an email and say, so-and-so's not showing up for work, and get a hold of me and we'll handle that. That's almost abandonment of position, but we'll deal with that when it's hardly ever happens. So, yeah, Nancy.
Okay, what happens with the temporary employee that's on a contract, the contract expires, it's determined after that fact that you're not going to bring that person back?
Well, you like the part-time faculty?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Or anybody on a contract, it's really important. Okay, your intent was, but then you decided not to?
No, the contract just ends.
Okay. We kind of
They're
need...
contracted for a certain period of time. That period of time is over.
Okay, they don't go on getting, if they're under a contract and their payment is based on them being on a contract, it ends when the contract is over with.
But they're issued keys or they're issued certain college property. That's not addressed in this policy as far as I can see.
We have not run into that as being a problem. Usually the contractual employees don't have a lot of things issued to them, but in the event that they do, Lisa Krause knows when the contract is up. She notifies Lisa Espedal, and there's follow-up that way. So that's built into our process in the office. That's about the only way we have, because if there's no expectation of employment beyond the contract date, there's nothing to notify us about. It would be better, in a perfect world, you'd send an email to us and saying, hey, this person's contract ended, March 1st, we're not going to continue contracting. That you can do that, and that's fine, and I have no problem with that. But we have an internal system where we monitor that as well.
I think you want to know what I run into, how to get ourselves out of it. For example, me, hire a baseball coach or whatever coach for the 12-13 season. At the end of that season, I'm not going to get another contract. I tell them that, let's finish the contract that's in
Right.
place. And then if I don't get the keys and everything, it's kind of hard for me to control. So then how do we wrap it up that hey, we told them that we're not going to offer them a contract for next year, told them to get his keys and his card in, but I want to get myself out of the
Well,
situation that might.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
You guys can help us a lot in this area. The employees who are just contracted for X period of time, we're not going to necessarily be able to get a hold of them as easy as if you have them turn stuff into you and then you just give it to Lance. That would be the easy, and then send an email to us saying, just a reminder that so-and-so's contract terminated 28th February, March 1st, whenever it was, just so there's a record of you collecting the stuff and then that stuff coming in. There aren't too many employees in that boat. There's a lot of part-time employees, like part-time faculty. Many of them teach for more than 1 quarter, but if they only teach for 1 quarter, then it really helps if you guys collect the stuff, if you know their employment's ending, and then send us an email, right?
I just ran into something similar to that. We have the Evergreen State College here on weekends and Wednesday evenings. So they want to, Wednesday nights, they want to go to a computer lab. Well, there are different instructors for every quarter. So Gloria asked me on the key slide for the computer lab to put a start date and end date
Right.
So that swipe key's supposed to be turned in at the end of this quarter because that instructor is not going to be teaching.
And that
next
key
quarter.
won't be good after that
And the
ending.
key won't be good. So if you have an idea, I guess that's another way. Gloria can put an end date on it, and then I think she asked Lance to collect keys.
That-
Right.
And he's good about that.
Yeah.
Because I have the issue where I couldn't get stuff
Yeah,
back
and I
from
think
someone,
it's
and they were
mostly-
mad.
yeah.
So Lance said, okay, then I'll just deal with it.
Well-
And I think that's
Right.
what he thinks his job is, and it is.
Right,
Yeah.
I think that's
Everybody
probably
needs
we
to-
attempted to collect, when we
Yeah.
attempted to collect and are having a hard time having that person come and give it to us. And I think in most cases it's that the intention probably was to issue a new contract, but it just didn't work out.
Well,
with the current contract, so.
If the decision is not to renew the contract, let us know, and we'll get up Lance, make sure Lance is informed so he can follow through and collect it. If you can't get it before the person leaves, we have contact information on the individual. We can send him an email, call
I
him.
think that might help if it officially comes from you guys, because I know in probably most of the cases, this happens quite often, and it takes months for us to round stuff up.
Well, I'm not asking you to engage in that. Just before the employee leaves, on their last day, if they don't turn in what you've asked them to turn in, notify us right away, and we'll get Lance on it. That's his job. And turn that over to him. He's the head of safety and security. And that, I'm just talking about, you're doing it, if you can just ask the employee before their last contractual day to please, on their last day, give you their card key or whatever it is they've been issued. And then you send it to Lance directly. You don't need to send it to us, and he'll fill out the form notifying.
But I think one of the things Darren's talking about, that's fine if you know that they're definitely not gonna come back, and so their last day, you come in, they come in and you get all of their stuff back. But in the situation where their contract ends, there's talk about maybe being able to extend it, and you call them and say, because you can't get them to come in, call them and say, look, it's just not working out, it's not gonna happen.
Okay, then
And
if that's the case.
I get chewed out because I didn't follow this procedure, which I did.
Okay, in the case where you realize the employee isn't going to be extended after the end of the
Right.
contract, send an email to us, we'll notify Lance, he will do the collecting. because I think in that particular case, it's for difficult for you, the supervisor, to do it. If you know in advance that the end of the month is their last day, that's easier to
Yes.
collect things from them than if the decision to not extend them is made a week after their previous contract ended. So the easiest thing to do to follow the process, and you'll be off the hook if you can do this, is let us know when so-and-so has ended, even after the fact. We'll notify Lance. He will be responsible for gathering the stuff. In some cases, there's nothing to gather, but usually there's something to collect from the employee. And I think Maureen's suggestion is a good one. If it's a card key, like is it the number or is it the swipe?
This way.
Then have Gloria put an end date on it. And the end date would be the last day of projected employment. But the problem with all that is, that's assuming you know all this in advance.
Right.
If you don't know all this in advance, and we're going to just follow through as I indicated, it's the best you can do. And that's what we have to work with in this case. The procedure is really designed and set up to deal with ongoing employee exit. The exception, the employee is not going to continue, and we don't find out until after the previous contract ends. We'll just have to deal with it the best we can, because that's going to be tough. Okay, maintaining files. I got a lot of questions on files. Your working file that you all can keep at your desk on your employees is not the employee's personnel file. Don't mix the two up. They're very distinct documents. You can keep anything in the working file regarding information about how well the employee is doing. Remember, the employee classified staff, I'm thinking of specifically, have the right to look at that working file or to have their union representative look at that working file. That's set out in both WPEA contract for represented classified staff and WAC 357 for non-represented classified staff. The exception to keep, now, one other before I go into the exception, when you do the annual evaluation and you've used documents that are in that working file to jog your memory about how well they've done, and the evaluation's fine, there's any major concerns about the job performance, you shred everything for that year in the file. The exception is if the employee is in corrective action counseling or formal discipline, keep everything in the file because that material is related to a process that's going forward. Yeah, Colleen?
So part of a working file seems to be emails these days because there's some correspondence. Are you saying that after we do the evaluation with the employee that we would delete those emails?
You can take them out of the working file. If you've made hard copies of the email and put them in the working file and there's no problems with the employee's performance, take it all out and delete it. There's no point having a working file that thick. It becomes too cumbersome. And then you start over. Many of you are doing 2013 evaluations now. So because your evaluations in this month is December. So when you're finished and there's no problem with the employee's performance, shred all that stuff and then start over this month for 2014. And then a year from now, you'll go through the same process. Personnel files are maintained in human resources. You can review the employee's personnel file at any time, but you have to have my approval to do so. So I'm going to want to know why you want to look at it. I'm not just going to let you look at it. Generally, 99.9% of the time I'll approve it. I get very rarely do I ever get a supervisor's request to see an employee's personnel file. Only time that really kicks in is if we're having performance issues. Or if we're having performance issues with the employee. But that generally doesn't happen other than that one instance. Any questions on maintaining quality? Okay, now, if anything else comes up that I don't answer today, because I tried to address all the questions I got, please write it down, bring it up when you're comfortable doing
Hey
so.
Dave,
Yeah.
if we have an employee who the evaluation is okay, but in the evaluation it says we're gonna work on certain skills or certain things, and there's documentation in their file
Yeah.
regarding that, we
I
can
would
still
keep it.
keep that.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's fine. Corrective counseling means you're working with the employee on some performance issue. Let's say they're late, and you've got emails telling them, you can't do this. You got to be to work on time, or they have an attitude issue, or they're making a lot of errors in their work. Any documentation regarding that kind of thing that you're just in corrective counseling about, not formal discipline, keep in the file. Because if you destroy it, you wreck all the documentation. Okay, reasonable accommodations, special accommodations. A lot of you can become involved in reasonable accommodation requests from your employees. Most common is they want an ergonomic keyboard or an ergonomic chair because of back, joint issues, whatever it is. First thing I need to see is something from the doctor. We're not going to engage in reasonable accommodation just because they say they need it. We need to have a statement from their doctor about what the problem is, what the doctor recommends we buy for the employee. And reasonable accommodation is nothing more than altering their work environment so they can perform the essential functions of their job. And all of the essential functions have to be done. So, the easiest thing to do is if your employee says, you know, I really need a special keyboard, get a hold of me. And I'll engage with the employee and you and tell the employee we need a letter from your doctor that says you've got carpal tunnel or you've got joint and wrist issues that he or she is treating you for. And that will become the basis for, and then we have the discussion, it's called an interactive dialogue with the employee. We don't just decide ourselves what they should have. The employee is involved in a conversation as well. And that can affect any one of you as well as anybody else. And then once we determine what it is that they need that will address their medical issue, I work with the purchase department. We look at costs, we look at different types of equipment or options. What is reasonable is a matter of the case by case. There's no rules. If the equipment is too costly or we have to hire an employee to work with them to do their job, that's unreasonable accommodation. That's something we're not going to do because of the cost and the complexity of it. And as I said, the purpose of reasonable accommodation is to allow the employee to do their work, to alter their working environment. The most typical kind of reasonable accommodation you're going to run into is specialized equipment, like a chair or a keyboard, or possibly altering their work schedule, where they come in a little later, they're having some side effects of prescription medication, they're really tired in the morning, so you let them work 10 to 6 instead of 8 to 5, or something of that nature. There are other types of reasonable accommodation, but those are the most typical ones that you're going to run into. Yes, Erin?
Is the expense covered by the department that employee works in? Or
Yes,
is it out of the
it's out of your budget. And let me explain how that process works. A lot of you don't have money in your budget to pay for this equipment. So Barbara McCullough, who's the Vice President for Administrative Services, will transfer money from another account into your budget. Barbara, it's very important to Barbara that all the expenses of your department are in your department budget. Even if you don't have money to cover it, she'll transfer money in so that all the expenses that your program has run up are part of your program budget. That's called sound principles of accounting. And we haven't always done that, and that's something Barbara's determined to change, and I agree with her. I'm not an accountant, but I understand that. Okay, any questions on reasonable accommodation or why we do it? Okay, am I being clear in this, or am I going too fast, or? Okay, stop me if I'm not being clear. Performance evaluations. They're conducted in whatever your work unit's evaluation month is. Most work units' evaluation month is December, but some people are in May, some people are in July. Those evaluations are required by the WPEA contract annually for classified staff, represented classified staff, and WAC 357 for non-represented. Do all of you know the difference between represented and non-represented, what those terms mean? If you don't, please say so. Okay, represented means that their position is in the bargaining unit, covered by the WPEA contract, or represented by WPEA. Non-represented means they're one of the 8 or 9 classified staff or supervisors, like Barb, who are not members of the WPEA, but they're classified staff, and the rules governing them are in WAC 357. So that's what we mean by those two terms. The vast majority of classified staff are represented. There's about 55 of them. They're in the WPEA bargaining unit. We have, I think it's around 8 who are non-represented. Okay, the process is, and this is very important, I know you don't like doing this, but this is extremely important that you do this correctly. The annual evaluation is based on the previous year's expectations. So this is what you do every year on the annual evaluation. You take the previous year's expectations and you draft how well they're doing. You can, if you want, have them draft their version. You get together and reconcile the two. You discuss the two different versions and reach consensus on what the final version will be. You look at the job analysis. This is very important. I cannot emphasize this enough. Anytime the person's job changes during the year, this is the key work activities, key competencies, you need to update it. Don't wait till the annual evaluation. If we have a reduction in force, and Mary Jane over here is going to bump Bill Smith because she's senior to him, she has to meet the requirements of that job. If you don't have this job analysis updated, she will bump him because I will not allow you to update it in the light of a RIF. It needs to be already done. So if new duties are added to a person's job, update the job analysis and update the skills that go with those duties. You're protecting your employees by keeping that document up to date. Now, new duties could be a new program, new software is called for to run it. Make sure that the job analysis is updated. You get the documents from me electronically, or you may have them electronically in red, but what the new duties are, and send them to me. So when you send them to me, you and the employee have to sign them. Without signatures, no document in my world means anything. It's just worthless. I have to have signed documents by the supervisor and the employee for this. And it's not just important from a layoff point of view. When you go to reasonably accommodate an employee, as we were talking about a little while ago, if you don't have the essential functions clearly lined out, how are we going to know what to accommodate to? So when you add new work and new skill, especially new work, determine whether it's an essential function. An essential function means that job position can't function without that job being done. Some jobs, some functions are marginal, meaning they're not that important. They're part of the job description, but they're not essential. But if it's essential, you need to mark it as essential in the right-hand column. And if you have questions, call me. But it is absolutely imperative that that job analysis be kept up to date, because you're doing a disservice to yourself, the employee, if you don't, for the reasons I've mentioned. And then you develop new expectations for the next year. Now, if job analysis doesn't need updating, just tell me in an email, the current one's fine, nothing's changed. So what you send back to me once a year is the new expectations, the new evaluation based on the previous year's expectations, and that's it. And you would include a new job analysis if the job analysis needs to be changed. And it's just easier for me if you put in red what the new changes are. That way we can document from year to year. That last year these three things were added, 2 of the 3 are essential functions, blah, blah. Okay. Any questions about annual performance evaluations? There's another side to evaluations. It's called probationary and trial service evaluations. A trial service and probationary are initially 6 months. Probationaries are a brand new employee off the streets, never worked for the state before. Trial service is the first 6 months of a permanent employee who goes into a promotional job, and they've gone in there usually by there's an open bulletin, they're a promotional candidate, and they've been selected. In the first 30 days of probationary or trial service, you need to do the expectations that they will be evaluated on in the 5th month to see if they're going to get permanent status. This is important. So don't forget, first 30 days of the new employee, I need to have them evaluate, or the expectations sent into HR of what you're going to evaluate them on. And you can wait until the 5.5 months or so if you want to, but no later than the middle of the 6th month you would wait to do the evaluation. Now, if you need to extend them because they're not doing the job according to your satisfaction, and you think 2 or 3 months or 4 months maybe would help them, let me know. But please let me know before the end of 6 months, because if you wait until the 6th month and 1 day, they're permanent, and you're stuck. So it's very important that the expectations are done within 30 days, and that you let me know if if there's a problem or not. If they're going to be successful and the 6 months is all that's needed, you do the evaluation no later than 5.5 months after they start, send it in to us, and I'll send them a letter telling them they're permanent, congratulations, they're permanent in the job class, and with the state, if it's probationary, if it's trial service, they're permanent in the higher level class.
And trial service is existing employees that are promoted?
Yes.
So
Yeah, it's a probationary period for permanent employees. That's the way I.
does HR contact us and towards the 5th month?
Oh, yes,
Remember
you get emails
to do
from me.
that?
Yeah, that's, some of you have.
What
Yeah,
about
I have a
a-
spreadsheet around them.
What about an employee who just moves from one,
Like a transfer.
yeah, so,
They probably
From-
would transfer, they would not, let's say in OA3,
but they're still in OA
they would not serve a trial service because they successfully got status as the OA3 before. Now, if we have, the only time an employee serves trial service is if they've never had status in that class, permanent status in that class. That's why you might think twice in the transfer, because you don't get a 6-month opportunity to evaluate. Any other questions on annual evaluations of trial service or probationary? You know the difference between the two. Now, this is what I would recommend you do. If you hire somebody in July to December is their probationary or trial service, don't do an annual evaluation on them. That's silly. You're going to have to do a probationary or trial service evaluation on them. Wait till a year later for their annual. You follow what I'm saying? If you hire them in January and their 6 months is up in June or July 1, and then December, you're going to need to do an evaluation on them because the annual evaluation is 6 months after they got permanent status. So whether you do or don't do an annual evaluation on a probe or trial service depends on when that period ends. Now, if you've got one that's hired in January and you have to extend them for a full 12 months, and that's happened a couple of times, you're only going to do one evaluation on them. You're not going to do an annual. The 12 months equates to probationary evaluation or trial service equates to an annual evaluation. Usually, if they can't learn the job in 8, 9, 10 months, I'm going to tell you, look, you're beating your head against a brick wall here, let them go. We have, not infrequently, extended probationary periods. If the employee was doing 3 out of 6 in 6 months, or 4 out of 6, but there were 2 critical areas that we're still having problems with, and the supervisor thought if we give them 2 or 3 more months, that'll work, we've done it. It's not my call, it's your call. I don't know how well the employee is doing. So you need to let us know before the end of 6 months if you want to extend. Okay. Now, they don't have the appeal rights if you let them go before the end of their probationary period. Now, if they're trial service employees and you let them go, they're going to revert back to their former job and it's going to create a rift because they have return rights to their former position. And so they may end up bumping the person hired behind them. That's their right as a classified employee. We can, bang our heads against the wall all we like, but that's the law, and we're not going to not follow the law. Well, let's put it that way. So they don't have appeal rights, but it does matter how they're treated. They can go to the Human Rights Commission or the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and file a lawsuit for discrimination or for any other type of bad treatment. So even with exempt employees, and they have the same rights, it does matter how you treat them on their exit out of the college. So just because they don't have any formal grievance or appeal rights doesn't mean that they can be treated just like any old way we want to. So please keep that in mind. Okay, performance evaluations for exempt staff, they're done once every 3 years. It's a 180-degree evaluation currently, where several of your peers, the person you report to, participate in it, and it's done based on E-Team approved standards. I haven't put any more of it up here because we're probably going to look at redoing the whole thing later in the spring. So I'm not sure that the current system works very well. Got a lot of complaints about it, and I don't. The problem is, no matter what kind of evaluation system we propose, somebody's not going to like it. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't create a better one than we have now.
When was the last time?
I was gonna say, Dave, I certainly have an exempt employee who has never had an evaluation, so we did an informal one, but
That's
she
fine.
starts and it's 3 years, I mean, she's in her second year, so I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that and.
Yeah, E-team
perhaps
is going to be
increasing it.
looking at it later in the spring.
Good.
But I'll be honest with you, it's probably not going to be done until the fall, because they want to route the proposal around to exempt staff to look at and get feedback on. And I think we really need to revamp it. I do like, and I'll tell you very candidly, I like the part where other people that you work with have feedback into your evaluation, not just your supervisor, because I think it's important that the people you work with on a regular basis, not just in your work unit, but in your peer group, have input on how well you're doing your job, because their opinion matters. Your supervisor may think you're fabulous, but other people may not. And that doesn't mean we're going to fire you, but it means that there are other people who have a right to provide feedback and for maybe some areas that you need to work on. And certainly let you know what areas you're doing well in, so you can continue to do well. I like that part. I think it's important. You know, Aaron, we may ask the leadership group, one of the alumni of the leadership group, to work on that. I don't know. Ed and I have got to figure that out. But
Right, and I just did a 360-degree evaluation and shared it with you. A lot of you guys participated in that for me, and that was very helpful. I
Yeah.
really like having all those different groups respond. That was very helpful.
Well, for example, in one of my evaluations, I had 2 comments out of 20 people that evaluated me that I'm intimidating. And I know that. And I don't mean to be. I don't, I'm not really, I've really worked on it the last 5 years, and I have not come across, tried very hard not to come across that way in the classroom, in my interactions with, and that comment was 5 years ago, so I haven't had any recent comments like that. But I really attempt to tone myself down and not be too intense, because the last thing I want to do is come across intimidating to anybody. Aaron?
And these once every 2 years, that's not based on the employee's anniversary. That is a scheduled.
It's a regular
college-wide.
schedule, that's right.
So, possibility of a new employee, if they're coming in right after or in the
We
middle of
would
this,
wait, would they wait till the next cycle?
they would have to wait for 3 years. We couldn't have like a 1 year.
Well,
Yeah, as long as it didn't fall, as long as it wasn't bumping up with the other one, have a 1 year for them.
under the current system, no. But you could do what Colleen did, you could do an informal. And if we're gonna rewrite the evaluation system, I think we ought to put something in there about an interim evaluation if they're hired in the middle of the 3-year cycle or near the beginning of it, after we've already done the last 3-year evaluation. Or maybe we should do them every 2 years,
Well,
I don't know.
Is there a reason for 3 years? I'm just saying, I think since the last time I did an evaluation, I think I've changed positions 8 times. I don't know, you know what I mean? So there
yeah.
could have been a lot of input that I could have gathered. I would have valued having more evaluations personally. but-
I'd like to see it annual personally, but E-team isn't wild about that idea. So I'm thinking, the most frequent I think I could get it sold is every 2 years. But that would be better than every 3 years. I think exempt employees, it's just as important to evaluate them as it is classified staff on a regular scheduled annual basis.
Well, and I think it's important for a new exempt staff not to have to wait.
I
You
agree.
know, say you just had that evaluation period, now you gotta wait 3 years to find out if the people you
If you
work
made
with
an
think you're doing
improvement, I mean,
it.
you can't do any development off of it if it's.
Exactly.
That's right. And the person doesn't have enough time to be made aware of the issue, to work on it, to try to improve it, to show there's been improvement. No, there's lots of reasons why it should be shorter than 3 years. But I have 8 other colleagues on E-team to convince me of that. Okay, new employees. We have a checklist that you all have there. That checklist, let me get a copy of it for my own
This is great.
that I can reference. This was just completed less than 4 or 5 months ago. There was a committee that worked with me for 18 months on this. It wasn't as easy to put together as you might think, because we had to get agreement. And what we tried to do is set up the things you need to do before they get here, the things you need to do their first day, their first 2 weeks, and by the end of 30 days. And there was a lot of discussion back and forth about where each of these activities fitted in terms of the 30-day time frame. And we think, and unfortunately, most of this falls on the hiring supervisor. And I know there are a lot of people who don't like that. But the hiring supervisor has control over a lot of the things that are going to happen to a new employee. HR has some of this, IT has some of this, but by far, the largest numbers of responsibilities are the supervisor. And the reason I like this is it clearly lays out what needs to be done. Now, that isn't to say that some things on here that we've missed, but I think we've captured 90+% of everything that a new employee needs. And the other thing that is very important, I think, when you have a new employee, is refer them to the handbook. Now, you might want to even go over the handbook with them, and we'll just bring this up right now. It's on the Human Resources page, under Resources for Staff, you highlight HR, it's right here. And if you click on it, it has an index, go down to the index. And these are live links on any subject area. If you want to know more about purchasing, you click on the page number, there it is. And there are links within the links to take you to something else that's relevant to that subject matter. As a new employee, I think it's very important that they review this. Because rather than learn about everything by trial and error, which has been our traditional method, this was set up not just for new employees, but to be a resource for all GHC employees. Because there's a lot of us that have been here 5, 10, 12 years and don't know about some of the stuff in here. And this is a resource for people to go to. And the managers of each of these areas are responsible for keeping this up. And the changes have to be sent to Nancy Estegard. Nancy is the keeper of the book. She's very graciously agreed to do that. So if you notice something in your area, like Work First, or purchasing, or business office, or food service, and something needs to be added or deleted, please let Nancy know. And Nancy will take care of getting the change to the website. I wanted one person to be in charge of it, because if we have everybody in there mucking around with it, something's going to get deleted or added that shouldn't be. So Nancy will be in control of that. And that's essential. And we set this up because the most common bit of information we got was that new employees, and especially new, but current as well, didn't know where to go to find out information on these various subject areas. That's why this was created. Erin was on the team, Nancy was on the team, Penny James was very helpful, Lisa Espedal, several other people worked with me to create this document. And and the committee members worked with the managers in these various areas to get this information put up there. And this was sent out to all the managers to review before it was posted on the website. So it isn't perfect, but we have a significantly improved orientation process for new employees with a checklist combined with a handbook on where they can find out how to do things. And this will tell them what area to go to if they have questions. If it's the business office, they're going to call Alita or Barbara or Kathy and ask, your new employee's name is Dawn? Dawn Coyne. Dawn is replacing Tammy Enstrom, and Dawn will be coming on board shortly in the other position in the business office. So,
Dave?
Yeah.
They need to understand the handbook really just explains what each department does. The internal links in that, for example, the purchasing one, it explains what purchasing is, what their job duties are. It doesn't say everything you have to do to do purchasing. It just says in the main document what that is. You
But
click
there's
on
a
the
link.
internal link, and then you get to how to do purchase card, how to do And mainly because everybody, new employees get thrown so much stuff all at once, it's really hard to retain everything, where everything is, and what we call things and what industry calls them are often two different things.
But if the new employee will go in here and they want to know about the library, there's something that they have to do, there's no internal links there. But it gives the employee the hours, the functions, what you find in the library. Nancy, where's one that has an internal link, do you think?
Purchasing does,
Purchasing, okay.
a lot of them do, but purchasing, where do you go at, library? Just scroll down.
Go back to the table of contents. If we go down to purchasing, which is on page 17,
Yeah.
you'll see an internal tab, your purchasing procedure and forms. If you click on this internal link, it will take you right to the purchasing page for credit, or for general, or for vendors. If you click on the credit card, it'll take you right to the forms you need to know about and fill out. If you have a transaction log, if you used your purchase card to purchase something, it tells you exactly what you're supposed to do. So that's why we wanted the live links in there for people to be able to use this.
And you have to go to the live links to find out who's in those departments. That's
Right.
not listed in the main handbook on purpose.
Correct. And we do want people to go to those live links. Not every one of the areas has a live link. HR does. Purchasing does. I imagine there's some in the business office, Alita, for your area. But that was all set up, rather than having an employee handbook that's 90 pages or 150 pages. The links allow you to go to the area that you need to find out more about the subject area. Okay.
Dave?
Yeah.
Just one thing, I appreciate this list, it's very helpful. But as a new supervisor, I don't even know pre-arrival on campus how to get some of these things. So let me give you an example, order business cards. Someone magically had them for me meaning Berta, when I started. But just if, you may want to look at even this list and make sure your supervisor understands it as well.
Well-
Because some of that stuff, I'm asking questions all over the place. How do I get this? How do I get that? So.
Well,
It's
that may
history.
be. The idea, and you have a good point. If you're a new supervisor, you're not going to automatically know how to get some of this, but you know what to get. And
Yes.
what you need to find out is, where do I go to get it? Who do I talk to?
Yeah.
What form do I have to fill out? And that's something we couldn't address. But it's a very good point, and I
It's
certainly
one of the
understand that.
frustrations, yeah.
So business cards, that's Jane.
Angle.
And Jane Goldberg handles business cards, your pads, your
Right.
name on it, all that stuff.
But that
But
wonderful
you-
history that you know only because you've been
Well,
there.
yeah,
It's
I've been
not-
around.
So all you're saying is one more call.
Yeah,
you know.
just like, just let me know, yeah, you
One
just
more
think about
call.
that for new supervisors.
That's what we do A through Z for a
That's
flow
true.
The
chart.
more you put, the
What
more
we
you
talked
put
to-
names into the document, the more you have to monitor the document and change it every
Or
time.
even
Yeah, we don't have to
departments.
put names, you
Yeah.
know, that's, I mean,
Well, no, for example, Tyler's talking about a third column that says, business cards, public relations. So you have the function in there, it doesn't matter if there's a person in there,
Yeah.
you call public relations to that. That's a good suggestion.
I would be going crazy with all the kids wanting one A through Z, 100 new outfits every year, so we have a flow chart that says, missions, this person's phone number, whatever
Right.
this person's phone number.
That's a good idea. But this is, and these are not cast in concrete. These are live documents, they're subject to change in the future, and that's a good suggestion, Colin. 1050 class is salary schedule. That was one of the handouts. This is all the 1050 classes that we have created over the years and the hourly salary for them. You must use one of these classes if you have a 1050 position. If necessary, I'll create a new class. If you have a job that's not on here or isn't covered, we don't have job descriptions for this, but the title is good enough.
Where is this online, Dave?
It's in the budget book, and I have it online in our shared folders. I can send you the link.
Well, yeah, just like, I was trying to find it one time and I just
It's-
didn't know where it was located.
On the HR page with the other exempt descriptions and stuff.
It is in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron.
Try to, yeah, it's we put it in shared folders on the
You
HR
don't have
page.
this memorized yet?
And I learned that the hard way, my dear.
Well,
That's
not,
a big
you don't,
mistake on that
not
one.
all these titles are in your area, but some of them are. And this gives us an hourly pay increase, an hourly range. If you want to increase the salary for your 1050, they've been here 3 years, 4 years, they're doing a good job, and you have your supervisor's approval, let us know and we'll up the range. Or if you want to increase it within the range, if the range is 9 to 12, you start them out at 950 and you want to go up to 1145, that's fine. It's easier if it's within the range, but if we need to, we'll increase the range to allow for that. Yeah?
Yeah, I had 1050 at several, right when I was a new supervisor, and I thought I was, I paid like $12 an hour, and I thought that was good for what she was doing, and she basically told me that she was worth more than that, and she's quick. She never showed up, she never came back to work. So that's just kind of funny.
Did you want to give her more?
That happens.
No.
Oh, okay.
The
I didn't want to give her more,
Okay.
no.
salaries are set based on what we feel are competitive dollar amounts for that function. Tyler?
Being the manager, can I increase my own range?
No.
I'll increase your range, Tyler.
That will be done by your VP and the executive team. You're a permanent employee. This doesn't apply to you. Anybody have any questions on the 1050 handouts? Okay. Classified staff and hours. Okay, just some basic stuff. Many of you I've gone over the labor contracts with, you're familiar with, you have to give notice if you change their schedule, all that stuff. But here they have 15 minutes for WAC 357 WP8 contract. They get 2 15-minute period breaks a day, one in the middle of the morning and the middle of the afternoon, is what the contract says. You get a half hour for lunch, hopefully near the middle of the day, not at 4 o'clock. You can't combine breaks and lunch into one, you can't give them an hour lunch with 2 15-minute breaks and a half hour lunch. That's a violation of the contract. That's for represented classified staff. Non-reps, I don't think that WAC 357 talks about it, but I recommend you follow this particular procedure for classified staff. Be consistent. You all understand 40 hours a week is a normal schedule. Anything over 40 is overtime. Do you all understand the difference between cash and compensatory time?
No.
Okay, cash is money. Coin of the realm, whatever term you want to use. Compensatory time, if you can't afford to pay them out of their budget, that you have to work them 44 hours one week, those 4 hours can be, you have to have the agreement, and please remember this, you have to have the agreement between the employee and the supervisor for it to be compensatory time. If they say no, I object, it's cash. But then you work this out ahead of time. And if necessary, with some employees, get it in writing. If they agree to the comp, but later they want cash, there's a trust issue there. If they want compensatory time, they get it in time, not money. So they get time and a half. So if they work for 4 hours, half of 4 is 2, they get 6 hours of compensatory time. Fill out the form, send it to payroll, and there's a comp balance set up for them in the computer. And when they take time off, we subtract it from their compensatory time before their vacation or before they're sick. Because if there's a balance on June 30th, if you have it of each year, if there's a compensatory time balance, you have to cash it out. No negotiation. So it's best if you have a classified employee working for you and they have a comp time balance, get them to zero it out as quickly as they can. And that happens when they submit a leave slip. If there's comp time on the books, that's charged first, even if they don't mark it. That's really important. Any questions about classified staff hours and breaks? Okay. If performance declines, when to contact HR. I recommend all of you, with all of the employees, whether they're exempt or classified, if you start to have a performance issue, talk to them informally. Just say, hey, I've noticed the last 3 days you came in late, haven't said anything, but you can't continue to do this. I need you here at 8 o'clock or 8:30, whatever your start time is. Please make sure that you're here on time from now on, or as often as you can. If you're going to be late, call me, but I expect that to be occasionally, not as a consistent, predictable pattern. Now, I'm using an easy issue of attendance. Okay, you have that informal meeting with them, they're still continue to be late 2, 3, 4 days a week. And late meaning 5, 10, 15, as much as half an hour, 45 minutes. Okay, you can have another informal with them if you want to. That's your choice. But by the third time around, it's time to call me. That doesn't mean I'm going to get involved, but we need to start setting up corrective action. I mean, you need to have what's called, for those of you who went through the accountability piece earlier, a verbal counseling session. And I'll help you with the documentation and all the things you need to do. And that, I don't get involved in those meetings until we have to go to written counseling. That's another escalated level. 80%, 90% of the performance issues can be knocked out through some informal counseling. They get it. There are some employees who don't get it. We have to go into more structured stuff. That's when you need to involve me. So is it clear when you can call me at any time during the process, even if you're in the informal stage. If you have questions about what to do, what to document, what to say, give me a call. I'll help you. You're not restricted from calling me at any time about anything. But if you want to know whether I think the stock market is going to go up, probably I can't tell you that. I'd like to know myself. But anything related to HR, really, you can call me at any point regarding any subject area, but especially performance issues, because that's hard to deal with in many cases. It's not impossible, and don't let anybody tell you that you cannot deal with a classified member and deal with their performance, because that's simply not true. You have to be willing to be persistent. You have to do what I tell you regarding documentation, but it's well worth it because either their performance improves or they're gone. And the objective of corrective action counseling or talking to them informally is not to set them up to be fired, it's to correct their performance. We don't get into discipline until we've tried all that and they still aren't cooperating and don't get it. Then we have to do some harsher things that nobody really likes. But we're not the author of that book, they are. Okay, work outside the job description. Okay, the thing that matters here is class specification, not the job description. They're two different documents, you need to know the difference. Class specification is on what used to be called the old Department of Personnel website. Now you get your copy of anyone that you have. This is the document that measures whether they're working in class or out of class. The job description, frankly, is only good for, it's a moment du jour, it's a document du jour, meaning it doesn't really have any relevance except as a baseline for what their work once was. And there's a difference between horizontal and vertical expansion. If you have, for example, if your classified position, let's say, is a program assistant, I'll just call it a PA, and you need to assign new duties to that position because new duties have been, there's a new grant, there's a reason for adding work, that could be a horizontal expansion. Can you give me an example of what horizontal expansion might be for a program assistant? New work?
More data input, spreadsheets.
Right. The work could be more data inputting. And that means that is a horizontal expansion of their work. It is not vertical. But if you give that program assistant major research responsibilities for the budget or for a grant, or tell that program assistant to put the grant together because you're too busy, that is a vertical expansion because it's outside their class specification. You read that by getting hold of me, getting a copy of the class specification, and read it to see how is their work defined, what is the level of work. And then you compare that to what you've asked them to take on. And if it is a vertical expansion, and 51% or more of the new work is vertical, you're going to have to upgrade them to a higher class. It costs more money. Hopefully your VP knows about it. Now, you can give them a vertical expansion of work up to 49%. We're not going to upgrade them because 51%, they're still in. Majority of their work is still within the class spec for their position. I don't like to treat employees that way. Sorry, I don't. I would prefer that first of all, if you're going to add work to an employee's position, call me. call me before you do it, because it's so much easier to deal with the problem ahead of time and know what you're getting into, what direction you're moving in, than to add new things over 2 or 3 years and then realize, oh my word, the person is a program coordinator, or they're a research analyst, or they're something way higher than where they started out. And this is budget creep. This is what causes salary costs to go up when we add new work to positions and it's of a vertical nature, and we don't think about whether or not it's horizontal or vertical, and what percentage of the time it changes their work. Percentage of the time are a big deal. They drive all the reallocation. So the key thing here is class specification. This is how we measure whether or not a position is working at a class or not. Erin, you go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hold you. No, you're fine. You're fine. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind minority versus majority work.
That's kind of like working under general supervision versus no supervision, or
Right.
or those kind of nuances. There's little words.
Well, for
In each
example,
class,
if
yeah.
you assign a program assistant supervisory authority over an OA3 or 3 OA3s, you've just made them supervisor. That means they're out of the bargaining unit because they're classified supervisor. They're a supervisor the majority of the time. You've got to upgrade their job to supervisory job class. That's kind of a ridiculously obvious example, but you know, I think the college's expectation, I'm sure your vice president's expectation, is you control your costs as much as you can. And that means you've got to be aware of, especially if it's new, what are you asking the person to do, and what direction does this work go, horizontal or vertical? Horizontal is the problem, the vertical is where you're getting more money.
So
Colleen?
Dave, looking at what I did wrong, so I have Berta, program assistant. What I say to her is, we have an evaluation, we're talking about, she does a lot of data entry. I say, how you feel about loading these numbers in the budget, she's not making any decisions around where they go, she's just loading them.
That's
So I know that's fine, I put it in the evaluation. Should I have talked to you about that
No,
beforehand?
no.
Okay.
If you
Fine.
know for sure,
Okay.
because you've got a copy of the specification that it's a horizontal expansion, you don't need to call me. What I really want you to call me on is when you think it's vertical.
Okay.
Because then I need to know how much are you adding? Are you completely changing the nature of the job? Or is it just 20% of their time on the new function and the other 80% is still of the old work? But it's much easier to deal with if you let me know ahead of time than if you wait until 2 years after the fact. What we really should do to stop this is make the upgrade go back to the effective date of the change. That would probably put a halt to a lot of, we really, in all honesty, we don't have a huge problem with that here. We've had upgrades here, but it's almost always been at the recognition of the supervisor, the administrator, the VP has recognized this employee needs to go up because of changes in the work. It's done early in the game, not years after the fact. So I'm talking about a problem that doesn't really exist at GHC, and that's great. We have very competent managers who manage their budgets very carefully. Okay, any questions about working people in or out of class? If you need a copy of the class spec for your people, please let me know, I'll get it for you. Very easy for me to do. Okay. What to say and what not to say as a supervisor? Well, there's no magic formula here. I wish there was. You're going to have to use your common sense. You all know from your training, from your experience, not to make sexist, racial, discriminatory comments. You all know not to tell jokes that are inappropriate. The jokes I tell are stupid because, you know, I might say, well, did you hear about the plumber who went back to school to remain current? No, that's the other way. Did you hear about the electrician who went back to school to remain current in his or her field? That's a dumb joke. It's perfectly, there's nothing wrong with humor in the workplace, but you need to be careful of the subject matter of your jokes because you can offend people if you get off the main track. However, I think you need to be aware of the following. This isn't so much about saying, but it's doing. Document important conversations where you might have to recall what you said in the future. Just do a memo to the file after they leave. Do a paragraph. Take you 3 minutes on the keyboard or less. And it's important, because if you think it's a conversation that you might be asked in the future, what did you say to somebody? I would recommend you do that. It's just protecting your own interests. If the subject of the conversation is things like medical issues, inappropriate conduct, or similar topics, document it and let HR know. If we don't act promptly, the college can be held liable, and you can create liability with the college. If you have noticed discriminatory, illegal, inappropriate behavior going on, and them telling you about it, the college is put on notice by the conversation having occurred with you. So that's, and you cannot promise to keep those kind of conversations confidential. If someone comes into you and says, you know, this person is attempting to touch me and always follows me and is making sexually suggestive comments to me, you cannot keep that confidential. Because if that person later sues the college and they can prove that you were put on notice, the college was put on notice, and you've just created liability for your employer. You need to let us know. I don't want HR to be viewed as the police, but let's face it, part of our job is a policing function. I'd be less than honest if I didn't say that. I don't particularly like that part of the job, but it's something that we have to do, and I have to protect the college's liability just as much as you do. I would recommend that if it's going to be a difficult conversation, you have a witness in there with you. And if you can't have anybody in the work unit be a witness, call me. Or call somebody outside the work unit whom you trust, who can be a witness about what was said. Because sometimes in difficult conversations, some staff will claim certain things were said, certain behaviors occurred, just to get back at the supervisor. And it's really important that, and I'm talking about difficult conversations. I think you all can think of examples of what that might be. I would recommend you do have a witness. Your selection of witness is important. I don't think it should be anybody else in the work unit, because then that means they're privy to what's going on. And this might be a matter that has to remain private between you and the employee, but you need somebody else in there to back up what you said or what you did. That's my recommendation. Do with it what you wish. Okay, that's all the questions I had. I'm willing to do more of these if new areas come up in HR that you need more information on, that you need explanations on. I hope this information is helpful to you, and that you'll be able to use some of it. I'm not saying we've addressed everything you could possibly know, but I think we've addressed some of the more common things that supervisors have questions about, and that they need to know which way to go. Yeah, Todd.
Do we have any part of HR that's occupational health, OH?
No, we don't. Actually, and I'm forgetting one thing. There's a few more here, so let's not jump the gun. No, I'm sorry, we don't. The only area that might be in is Lance's area. You might have something in that area, so give Lance a call. Holding exempt staff accountable for work performance. Exempt staff are employment at will. That means in theory we can get rid of you for any reason, any time. Blink the wrong way, you're out of here. In reality, that's not true. If you have an exempt employee who has work issues, what Ed would expect is you to talk to that person, give them written expectations, give them a chance to meet the expectations, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days, whatever makes sense. And if they don't, at the end of that period of time, meet those expectations, we will terminate their contract. That will be me and the vice president, or me and you. And that's only after they begin an opportunity to tell them what they're doing wrong, expectations about what they're expected to do correctly, and then a reasonable period of time to meet those expectations. Many of you are exempt employees. Don't you want to be treated that way? Or do you want us to let you go the nanosecond you do something wrong? I don't think that's what you want. And throughout the above process, I'd recommend you work with HR on that if you have an exempt employee that's having a performance issue. We will work with the appropriate VP and/or you, the immediate supervisor, if we're going to terminate their contract. It does matter how you treat exempt staff. Even though they don't have appeal rights or grievance rights, They can do the same thing that probationary employees can do. They can go to the Human Rights Commission in Olympia, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a federal agency, file a claim with a tort claim for harassment, discrimination, a lot of different torts. They're all, torts is not something you put in the evidence 350. That was a different time. Torts is a legal wrong, and treating people badly, harassing them, creating a hostile working environment. I quit because the supervisor was a jerk. They harassed me, they set me up, they did everything possible to make me bad. And they created a hostile working environment which was discriminatory, so they filed a Human Rights Commission complaint, there's an investigation, it gets messy. So just because they're exempt, it does matter how they're treated. It matters how probationary employees are treated if we have to exit them. So keep that in mind. And, in my opinion, you should document. If you have an exempt employee that you have to talk to, I do a memo to the file discussing what you talked about and what the written expectations are, because it only protects you. You can prove you're not just getting rid of them on a whim for no reason. Reference checks. This is the last two slides. If you get a call for a reference check, do the following. We don't have a template letter, but only agree to discuss work-related information and ask for release. If they can't give you a signed release from the employee who wants you to be their reference, you have no information to give that person. That's imperative. Protects you. That employee would have signed a release and said, I release anyone from liability who gives information about my previous employment with so-and-so. Now, you really need to tell the truth about your work experience with them. Only talk about work-related information. Don't give a bunch of personal information that you know about that has nothing to do with the job. You can only be successfully sued for slander or libel if you give out false information that isn't true. That doesn't all have to be documented. It has to be an honest assessment of your experience working with them. And that's why honest work-related information is important. No release, no information. And they ought to be able to fax you the release the person signed before you talk to them. Yeah, Pauline?
It's a quick answer. It's pretty rare that a supervisor can give this kind of
No,
reference
I don't
these
think
days.
so. If Danielle gets a job somewhere else, she's
Yeah.
going to list you as a reference, you're going to get a call.
And there's not been any discussion at your level to say we want that to just come through HR that hasn't
No, I
happened?
think the supervisor,
awesome.
I don't know anything about her work. I would refer them to you.
Okay.
I'm in no position to talk about anybody's work except my own staff's and mine. But it makes no sense to me for me to be giving references about people who I haven't had any experience working with. I just no idea how well. I couldn't answer anything competently. Tyler would be the most qualified person to have references on coaches because he knows whether or not they've done a good job or not. I have no idea.
I certainly agree, Dave, but you don't see that. I mean,
Well,
I see that movement.
Well, I'm the one that
Not
asked the
being able to
question
do that.
because I'll get that about people. I get that sometimes, and you know how it is. You might have been a programmer at Microsoft for 10 years, but their official policies, we're not going to give you a job reference to
Exactly.
protect their butt.
Yeah.
That's
And
not
I just
our
wa-
policy.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that I'm towing our line because
I
get that
have
stuff.
always opposed that policy of only HR giving the references because I'd have to have you write it all up anyway.
Yeah.
And I just read it to them. And why do I want to do that? I'm not afraid of what, as long as you know and you've been trained on what to do, I have no problem with it. And usually what happens is supervisors get a reference call, they'll call me and say, what should I do? I tell them this information. Get a release. No release, no information. Most employers that are recruiting will have everybody that's being interviewed, this is what we do, sign a release for the background check and a release for the reference check at the same time. In our case, it's the same document, 2 different paragraphs. And we have everybody who we called in to interview sign that document before they go into the interview. So Lisa Krause has a record of those documents, and we can fax release to anybody who wants it.
Well, it's really no different than releasing information about students.
Right.
You know, in order because we work with a lot of students who are from various funding sources.
Absolutely.
They can call me all day long, but I'm not gonna tell them anything unless I have a release.
That's very true. It's the same process, it's the same implications.
And the ones that get really angry are parents. Because I won't discuss it with them. I'm not gonna tell you what Johnny's doing, he's 18. He's doing road speed.
Unless you have a release from
Yeah.
John. Now, getting references, there's a difference between giving them and getting them. This is getting references. As I said earlier, we have all applicants sign authorizations for reference checks and background checks, so you have one, or we can provide you with one. If the person who you're calling wants one, 90% of the time they want to ask, so just babble on about the person. I'm telling you not to do that. Don't babble, get a reference, then babble. Make sure it's work-related, honest babble. Okay. Call the official references. Now you know these are going to be glowing. You know that they wouldn't choose people, they're going to badmouth them. Ask every one of these official references, who else, are you aware of anyone else that worked with them and has knowledge of their work? And hopefully they can give you the names of at least one or two other people. Get their name and number and call them too. You should never rely on just official references. You're taking a big chance if you do it. It's not a good idea. You're not going to get a complete picture. Now, if you call 3 official and 3 or 4 non-official and they're all fine, and you've got a reasonably good chance that the person is as good as they say they are. Because why would people who weren't listed as an official reference have any reason to not be honest, to be less than honest with you in many cases?
Dave,
So-
you have a copy of what we ask during reference checks? Is there a form?
No, you
Okay.
just write out questions ahead of time. Usually the screening committee, in addition to the rating guide, will develop reference checks, questions, and people will be assigned to do the reference checks. But I cannot emphasize enough, don't just rely on the official ones. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. Interviews are phony as hell. If I had my way, I'd eliminate them. That's just my opinion. I'm not saying that's an official stand of the college. They're phony. Sorry. Because everybody's behavior is their best behavior is during an interview. And they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear in many cases. Now, I don't mean that all interviews are giving false information, but I'd like to do a recruitment just once where we don't interview anybody. We paper qualify them, do reference checks and hire, and wonder how much worse it could be if we actually did it. So, you know, maybe I'm a little bit of a radical in this area, but I've sat through 40 years of interviews. And where the rubber meets the road, where you really find out what the person is like in the reference checks. If you hire anybody based on just the interview, you're not going to get sympathy from me when you, I mean, you might get a great person, but the odds are you won't. So it's in your best interest to get a release and to do the reference checks. Alita.
And I would say pay attention to the little tingles in the back of your head.
Oh, yeah.
If
Absolutely.
you get this funny feeling when you're interviewing somebody, you know, it'll more than likely play out in.
More often than not. And
Plus,
Ask-
they can look really, really good on paper and walk into an interview and you're like, oh, wow.
Very
yeah,
true.
this doesn't exactly match how you looked on
Right,
paper, but
right.
then you even go into a reference check and you can find out from reference checks and more than the 3 official ones, you know, what I'm getting here is not the impression I got when we interviewed. Something's wrong. And those are big red flags for you to slow down and not make a hasty hiring decision. You need the position filled.
Well, that seemed like a pretty dumb question, but I did not know if you could go call someone they hadn't listed.
I don't think it's dumb, because I was just thinking
No,
the same thing.
because that's why I asked, I didn't know if I
Call the
could.
official
No,
references.
no. You have the right to ask anybody who has, that's why I put this up here. You have the right to ask the names and numbers of anybody who they think has knowledge of their work.
Okay.
And if you get the unofficials telling you what the officials are telling you, or 5 out of 6 telling you the same thing, 2 of which were unofficial, 3 were, you're in a pretty solid position. The 3 unofficials are to check what the officials are telling you. If you know the officials are going to give you wonderful information, you want a way to verify that. And the way you do it is get names and numbers of other people from them who knew about their work. Now, we have everybody fill out an application that lists all the past supervisors and their phone numbers. If the officials won't give you any and won't tell you who those people are, look at the application and you see Colleen and Maureen and Nancy are past supervisors. They're not listed as official references. Call them.
Those are the ones I would call.
Well,
Not
yeah,
even the official.
absolutely. So if past supervisors, if there's some past supervisors, or in some cases all past supervisors who were not listed as part of the official reference, that's kind of a red flag for me. I want to talk to those people, and I want to see what they think about Dave Halberstadt's work performance when he worked for them. That's my recommendation. And most importantly, ask how they did the work. Your interview question should be about the how, not the what. Don't ask, what did you do as a team leader on this project? Ask how you did it. Because it's in the how they did it that you really find out whether they're inclusive, whether or not they take other people's opinions into account, whether or not they, how they go about doing it. If you want to hire a good team player and they describe how they did something, you're going to find out more about whether or not they are a good team player in the way they describe how they went about organizing to get a project done. Well, I went out and I asked somebody from every single work unit that was impacted by this project to be on the committee. I asked them for their expertise in this area. That's the how. The what is you did it, but how did you do it? So I think you ought to interview for the how. This is what Costco does, and interview and do reference checks for the how. So your reference checks question should be asking, you can ask what, but also ask, how did they go about doing this? What process did they follow to redo all the Nukubo budget codes? Something like that. Or get the ATM fixed. How do they go about that? Two of Alita's favorite subjects. So,
Dave, can I ask you a question?
yeah, of course.
There's always been some controversy back and forth as to when to make those reference calls. In our area, we've always felt that it was important to make those reference calls before we do interviews. Because, but it does. And there's been a couple that have changed that. By doing that, sometimes it's identified that the person we think we want to interview has been a terrible past employee and really didn't perform well on the job. Why are we going to spend time interviewing?
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong in doing reference checks before you decide
But
to
there
do an
isn't,
interview.
that's what I'm asking,
No.
there isn't a.
No.
Have
There's
they
no
signed a
rule.
release at that point, though?
You have to have them,
At
yes.
that point,
They
they've
apply.
already done it?
But
They apply.
they apply, if for example, Mike Kelly likes to do this a lot, and I think Nancy's done it before. If we know that reference checks are going to be done before the interview, which is not usual, but it's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
We'll get the releases signed as they apply, or someplace well before the interview. So by the time Nancy or Mike or whoever else is doing this, is doing the reference checks before the interview, that's already been taken care of. Normally, we do them after the interview, and that's why they sign it when they come in for the interview. But that does not have to be that way. But you need to work with Lisa Krause and let her know if you want to do it differently. There's no rule that says you can do about when you should do it. There is a rule for me in my brain that says you should do it. If you hire without doing reference checks, I'm not going to be very sympathetic when you hire a problem person. But the problem is you're creating work for me because I got to work with you to deal with it. So it's in your best interest not to do that. Barbara?
When we were doing hiring for both the bookstore and food service, there were some times on there where they say, no, you cannot
Right.
Contact employer.
contact previous.
That's a problem.
That, we kind of went, and just,
A lot of times though, you wonder, and you can't contact them, so you never know, but you're somewhat sympathetic because they not want my boss to know because then they think my one foot's out the door and this and that.
If it's a current employee, you can
If it's
understand.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about past, okay.
So,
But you have the right to ask them, why is it that
Yeah.
you don't want us, can't we ask them that?
well, this is how we handle it. If they're going to be a finalist for the position, they interview, and you don't let their current employer know that they've been they're going to interview. And they're among the top 1, 2, or 3 finalists. We then call them and say, look, you're a finalist for this position. We really have to, if you want to remain a finalist, we have to be able to contact your current employer, because we can't have you proceed in the process without our ability to talk to your current supervisor and people that you work with at your current employment. And usually, 9 out of 10 times they'll say fine, even if they mark no contact. At that point, they'll let you know.
I don't feel like that should put that application in the discard file.
No,
Pile,
yeah.
you know, because
Right.
like Tyler said, a lot of people have good reason, you know, if they're not really going to be considered for that, why make for difficult feelings at your current position and by letting your supervisor know, you know, I understand that.
There was one who did go into detail on why they couldn't be contacted.
I think a lot of times, actually, they will do that
Yeah,
voluntarily.
But there were some who just said no, but, you know, there was one, and I understand why, because it was a conflict between, I mean, I don't know if it was a sexual harassment type deal, but she did go into detail on why.
Well, some employees are punished if their employer finds out they've applied somewhere else. They're retaliated against or whatever happens. But the way we handle it is the way I described. We can't go ahead with any hiring process if you're a finalist, if you won't let us contact your current employer.
Yeah, and that's, I just have a, can contact her employer and find out that that person was worried about getting released where they're at, for whatever reasons, and actually was hoping to get the job as leverage.
At least, yeah, that happens. Last year we had 2 employees who was finalists who didn't want us to contact their current employer, and Mr. Krause alerts me to that, and I call him and say, look, I'm head of HR, and I really need to tell you that we can't allow you to proceed as a finalist if you won't let us talk to your current employer. We haven't up to this point said anything. We've honored your request, but we can't honor it anymore. Now, they said, well, I can't have you, then I said, okay, then we're dropping you from being considered. I didn't even ask the hiring manager because we just can't. There's no way that we're going to take that kind of risk. But that's a rare event. I mean, we're talking about something happening once every 2 or 3 or 4 years. So the vast majority of people understand that if they're a finalist, even if they marked it, don't contact my current employer, they know that at some point that's going to happen. Okay, last slide. I think this is the last slide. Yes. Talking to staff. If you're concerned about a staff member regarding how they're behaving or how they're feeling, it's okay to ask them. You might want to refer them to the Employee Assistance Program. We have a contract with the Employee Assistance Program, which is part of Enterprise Services in Olympia. And we have the contact information. They can go there. They have an office. They have a counseling service here in Aberdeen now that are contracted with EAP. If they're having personal issues or they're having any other kind of issues, get them into EAP. If it's within your power to fix the situation in your office, please try and do that, because it may not be a personal issue. It could be a conflict with another staff member. But if you see them acting weird, strange, out of character from the way they normally act, ask them what's wrong.
Are you
And that's free to
referring
them.
to staff as all employees or
Yes,
staff
all
as
employees.
classified?
All employees.
Well, a lot of places have of HR that have occupational health services as part of it. So if someone comes in, they're not being themselves, you don't know what it is, and you're concerned, it's free to them. There's free counseling hotlines, there's all sorts of stuff, and it's free to the person. And I was concerned if I have someone that is way out of their normal character, I'm concerned, do we have something like, I didn't realize this EAP, and is that free to them, something that I can
It is
pay?
free to
Okay.
Now, this is not an ongoing counseling service. This is like a screening service where they go and they meet with an EAP counselor. If they think they need mental health counseling or something else, they'll refer them to local counselors in the community that can help them. The conversation between them and EAP is confidential. It only is shared with the supervisor if they sign a release that EAP can tell the supervisor about what they talked about. Normally, the employee won't do that, but sometimes they do. It just depends. But I really recommend you use this. We pay, I think it's $1,600-1,700 a year for the service, and frankly, rarely get anybody using it. But I think supervisors need to be aware of it in case you do have an employee that has some real intense issues, and we all, in some periods of our life, are better than others. And
But
it
then it
might
does-
be good to refer them to EAP.
But then after the original screening counseling thing, and they get advised to go to, here's your other options as far as counseling, then they're paying for it, right?
Or their medical insurance,
Or medical,
they cover
okay.
50% of counseling. You're going to have to pick up the difference.
Is that confidential? If somebody I supervised came to me and they were in trouble and I referred them to the employee assistance program, is that confidential to
Yes.
even, does your HR office find out about it, or?
We don't need to know about it. You can call and say, hey, I have an employee who I may want to refer. You don't have to tell us who it is. Just, can you give me the name and number of the service? So I
And
can-
you don't do paperwork for it, you don't do
The
any.
cover walker staff part of the show up.
I specifically told my staff, it's none of our business. It's between the supervisor and that service and the employee. We don't need to get involved unless there's a performance issue. Thanks for coming, Tyler.
Sorry, I got 2:30.
No problem. So that's not something, now I'll tell you, we know a lot of stuff because people volunteer. It isn't that we're asking, well, who is it? What's their name? What's their, I mean, they just blurt it out before you can stop them. And so I'm glad people feel confident enough to tell us. We certainly don't blather around the campus. If anybody worked for me who did, they wouldn't be working for me. But it's just, you know, confidentiality is critically important in an HR office. And we know a lot of stuff, not because we go soliciting it, which people tell us. But no, we would not ask. We would not expect the supervisor to tell us the name of the employee or what the problem was.
My question really was, do you have a function that's associated with that? But it sounds like EAP is completely separate
It
from
is.
the function of our HR office.
Yes, we have no functional relationship with EAP other than the contractual one, where we give that name and number to employees who may need contact.
But they don't contact you back and
No.
say, you have.
They can, the one thing they will do is they'll tell us whether or not the employee went to EAP.
That's not on my file.
They'll tell us whether or not the employee went to EAP, but they won't tell us what they talked about or.
But only if you call and ask if the employee was referred,
Correct,
correct? I
correct.
mean,
They
they're not
won't,
gonna,
they
there's
will
not a
not
report that comes
automatically
out.
call you. You have to call and ask. And we usually do that in a performance issue scenario where they're in corrective action counseling and they've got some real issues and we referred them to EAP and we want to know if they went. It's an indication to us whether they're serious about dealing with their issues or they're just going to let it go on out of control. Okay, does this kind of thing, is this helpful or is this a waste of your time?
No, this is good. There was some new stuff in there that I wasn't aware of.
Well,
Well,
I'm even coming forward, because I'm not exactly new, and it's still, I'm not new to supervising.
you're not
this.
ancient either.
Well, yeah.
What are you referring?
How long you been doing taxes?
But it is
That
kind of
little
interesting
track.
because there's some of this stuff that I don't know if it's new or I just we didn't
Well,
see it before. What?
Some of it evolves. I might have said some of this 4 or 5 years ago, but over time, practices change for various reasons because things happen and we decide to do it a different way than the way we might have done it 5 or 6 years ago. This is current thinking. A lot of it's already in the law or contracts where we have to follow these practices, and so that's where it all comes from. Some of it's common sense. What we call common sense. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.